Let us begin right now with our next pairing. Please welcome Kaskade and Stuart Price. It's a long walk.
Wow. That was like getting married, how slowly we walked up there. Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart. This is Ryan.
This is Stuart. Stuart over here. How you doing?
So Ryan and I, just for disclosure, we have actually met one time before, just one time, so we kind of know each other. But our sort of plan for today was to try and have a conversation. Hopefully, some interesting stuff will come out in it, and we're just sort of gonna let it roll. And if we panic, we've got some notes up here to kind of look at and give us some ideas. But we'll just start. So, hope you enjoy. Ryan.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
I suppose, seeing as it's topical, we should start with like your show that you just did this weekend, which is a pretty insane show with an amazing sort of reaction, and it sort of looked incredible and was just, I mean, the smile on your face in it sort of kind of says it all. But does that feel like a sort of, how far away does that feel from kind of the years where you were just making beats at home and sort of not really knowing where it would go and if it would go anywhere?
Yeah, it's so that there's a huge discrepancy there. When I started out, I don't think I ever had any intention that it would be a career path or anything that I could make enough money to sustain a life doing. So, I mean, for me, I think I just started out in this direction because it was something I loved. And then kind of with every turn and as my career kind of grew, I just continued to look for more opportunities to be able to do it. And that eventually led me to this place. But I mean, for a very long time, the first half of my career, it was always kind of a very passionate hobby. I say that and I laugh because when I got married, my wife was like, well, when are you gonna like really get serious with this? When are you gonna start taking it serious? And I was like, I don't know, man, I'm just having so much fun. It's a hobby of mine. Why you gotta be so serious?
You were saying that about your music or about your relationship?
Both of them.
Yeah. Don't get too serious in either.
I have a question for you. I was looking back and looking at your amazing career and all these people that you'd worked with. I typed it up. And I should say that I'm a huge fan of Stuart. I've been following his work for many, many years. In fact, I don't know, it was probably 6 months ago, I was cleaning out some vinyl and I took a picture of one of the old 12 inches that I had of yours, and you kind of gave a good laugh.
That's cool.
And I sent it to you and I was like, oh, I dug this up. I tried to find it again today because I was going to have it signed. I mean, the piece of vinyl is probably 12 or 14 years old or something. But you've had this long, illustrious career and worked with so many people. And you've always been somebody I've really admired, a person with integrity that has been able to kind of navigate such a difficult business with so much integrity. I've always wondered how you decided to take the production route. I mean, because I know you were DJing, and when we hung out that one day, I was like, you know, what was it that you chose more of a production route over the artist route? You were obviously very successful as an artist. I mean, Le Rhythm Digitales, I can remember getting that vinyl, and it was a huge day at the record store, and everybody was freaking out, jack your body, wow, just like, what made you, from that point on, decide to take a different path?
I think it's because, like, I've always just thought it's almost like there's so much music in the world. There's so many different places to go. There's so many different routes and so many different angles you can take sort of within performance or within remixing or within production. And like, as you know, the line between am I a producer, am I a remixer, am I a songwriter is so thin. Like if you're in the studio and you're remixing versus you're making your own song, I don't know if you're necessarily thinking, well, today I'm Mr. Remix, and so it has to follow these rules. You're just thinking, I just want to make something good. I just want to like, I just want this to make me, you know, like jump up and down, and then when I share it, I want to see the reaction I get from it. So I kind of think part of that desire to be constantly just moving on to new things and trying things in different genres means that like that has to come at the expense of having a single sort of focused career. I mean, my manager and wife Angela's like, "You're fucking stupid. You should focus on one. We'll just do one thing." But to me, the appeal of being able to do all this in music is that it can be so varied, and like whether it's pop, whether it's rock, whether it's dance, they're just vehicles. Those are just vehicles of, you know, different styles that you're going through. But you can apply the same heart to it. You can apply the same like search of euphoria to it. I mean, that's like, you know, we all have kind of our different desires for music, but euphoria is the one thing I keep coming back to because it feels so good.
Right.
And so I think you just apply that to whatever you're doing. I mean, when you're, you know, the basis for you of when you write, when you're coming up with a track, I mean, do you necessarily think about the end result? Do you think about, well, I'm going to play this to 200,000 people, or do you think, whatever, this is just cool?
I always start out, I think this is cool. I'm just like you, I want to just make something that's cool. So I never start out with a single intention, like I want to make a hit record, or I want to make something that I'm going to play at 3 in the morning. I think about that after the fact. And it's usually like sitting in a meeting when I'm playing my music for Stephanie or for my wife, Naomi, when I'm playing it to other people, like, oh, wow, maybe this could be played at this moment, or this conveys this kind of emotion when I kind of step back from it for a moment. But while you're in there creating, I agree with you, it's just more about, I just want to make something cool that will be here next year, you know, next week, next year, 10 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the best thing about music is that you can't lie through it. Your music always tells the truth about where you're at and what you're doing. If you're having a good time, you normally hear it on the record. If you're having a bad time, I don't know if you hear the bad time, but the records just sort of end up being pretty kind of lame. And that's just, the truth is always told on the record. And so I suppose you kind of have to enter that, you know, that becomes part of your process, that whatever you're going through at that time is what will be reported. I just think, you know, and this is kind of coming down a few notches from, you know, 100,000 plus crowds, but a great motivator for me in any genre has always been the nightclub. And it is one thing that I particularly sort of miss from the whole process for me, is just playing a lot in nightclubs. There's an instant sort of feedback that you get when you play a record. You sit there in the studio making a track going, okay, this is the one that's going to change the history of music, and then you go out and play it, and within 4 beats you go, this is terrible, and you have to get it off. And so as a part of the process, you can understand that is sort of, you know, it's a necessity. It's definitely something I miss doing, because you know, now I sort of,
that feedback is so instantaneous. You get there,
and you can't fake it.
Yep.
Again, it has to be the truth. But your schedule kind of dictates that you're always sort of in the club in one way or another. You know, it's pretty intense, your touring schedule. So do you find that kind of overlaps into your studio time, that you're sort of already in this kind of zone when you're there? Or maybe, like you said,
I think
you just tune it out.
No, I think it's definitely affected the way I write and produce, because, I mean, for good or bad, I have spent the majority of my, you know, last 10, 15 years hanging out in a nightclub. I mean, that's all my social time. That's what I do. I'm either performing or I'm hanging out watching somebody perform. So that's had, you know, a profound effect on what I write when I sit down. And I think that's part of the difference of the sound from my first album to my most current stuff, people, I think a lot of fans are like, oh my gosh, you've changed over this time. That first record, you haven't recaptured that magic,
Yeah.
or whatever they're saying when I'm having a conversation with somebody, and I'm like, it's because I'm a different person than I was 13, 14 years ago when I sat down to write that. I mean, not only what I was writing about, but just even how I'm producing the shape of the record, the technology I'm using, but what's just going on inside of my head, the experiences that I'm going through. It's impossible for me to recreate that moment again. And even if I was to recreate it, it would try and recreate that, it would sound different because, like you said, the truth always comes out. You always sit down and, like, no matter what, you're conveying what's going on in your head and in your heart.
Yeah. So I think one thing that always kind of comes across in what you do, and the thing I found is an individuality. Like, it's not just in your music. I feel like it's who you are as a person. I feel like it's in how you present your world, and I think that's in how people follow you as well. Is that you just have this this individual kind of spirit, which I think is hard to sort of take and really take it up to kind of the top level. I think that's like the first time we hung out, we didn't really know, we didn't hang out with a purpose. We just kind of met up because we were both in town, and that sort of really came across. But do you other influences and people that have sort of kind of made you want to pursue that? I mean, which artists? I know you hate this question. Which artists inspired you? What are the peak characters that you've always gravitated towards that sort of have that about them too?
For me, in the early time, like when I first got into this, it was the guys, the Chicago pioneers, the people that I was growing up listening to. I was going to a weekly party that Frankie Knuckles was throwing in the city, and it was just really inspiring. I didn't know much about the music. I understood that it was called house music, but there was just a lot of misunderstanding on my part. I couldn't identify with one song. It was with the vibe and with this guy that was playing. And through that, I discovered Mark Farina, Derek Carter, the Hot Mix 5, all the kind of like early Chicago pioneers. And I think part of what was so interesting to me is it was so rhythmic based that I thought, but it was so emotional at the same time. It was really, it was just very honest music. It was very simple but soulful and emotional and very raw. And it represented the city of Chicago, very blue-collar sound, like working class, like this is house music, this is what we're doing. And I was just very inspired by what was happening at that time. And then as kind of that sound matured, I was growing up and I was in junior high, and bands like New Order, a song like Blue Monday, just kind of when I heard that, it changed everything because it was this weird kind of mix of what I was listening to with house music, but it was more melodic and it was more thought out. And it opened up a whole new world. I started listening to more synth pop, and then I discovered bands like the Smiths and Morrissey, and started getting more into songwriting and thinking about how if you marry cool and interesting production with like a beautiful idea and lyrics and melody, how that can be so powerful. It was just the pioneers of what was happening. I was really fortunate to be growing up in Chicago at a time when that was just booming, and it inspired me to go where I am. What about you, though? I mean, that's always in it. And I mean, dude, later on in my life, like I said, I just want to take a moment before you tell. Well, no, I'll ask that as the next question. You tell me about who inspired you.
Well, it's like it's funny because so listening to you sort of talking about growing up in Chicago, like I'm from Reading in England, and Reading is it's a pretty small place, and it definitely doesn't have the sort of allure or the kind of I think anyone that's from England will probably know, but it doesn't have the. I mean, for me to hear, well, I was just growing up in Chicago listening to Frankie Knuckles, I'm like, what the fuck? This like, I was so fucking far away from that music, and
How did that happen then? I mean, you guys loved it. You picked up on it a lot quicker than the States did. It's like we had our little boom in Chicago and Detroit and New York, and you guys imported it so quickly. We were like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's a shocker that, to this day, it's a shocker. But I think, you know, so the stuff I listened to was things like, I listened to Jean-Michel Jarre. I listened to these things that probably came up because the scale of the shows, I mean, it's insane to think about what that guy was doing at that time. I mean, I think, you know, probably most people know his music, or at least have an idea of the sound and its kind of contribution to musical history. But this is a guy who in the late 80s or early 90s, he was putting on free concerts in Paris to 250,000 people, just on the streets with PA systems on every single corner. Just, he thought on a scale that was so far off the charts for those days. I mean, at the Millennium, where does he play? Like the Pyramids. You know, this is a guy who has kind of big ideas for doing it. And I think that idea of scale, it made me personally think about music as an event, not just about something that, you know, is a soundtrack to your day, or is you know, something that, you know, perhaps gives you memories, but as like, it can be an event. This music can sort of signify something big happening. So for me personally, to this day, I always try and make records that have a, you know, there's a grandness in there. I mean, you know, it might just come on a pop record from, you know, orchestrating it well, and, you know, having an orchestra record some of the parts for it, but trying to make something feel like there's something big happening. So I think that sort of thing comes from, you know, from being influenced by artists like that. But the other people I really liked were, along with the Chicago guys, were people like, you know, Aphex Twin, like a guy who's just such a, like, you know, fiercely rotten individual, like procurer of, you know, odd fuck you, love you music. You know, it's you know, his sort of singular vision for how he sees the world. I think even now, probably no one knows the truth. It's just he has such an intense, complex way of looking at things. So in between these two polar opposites of, you know, Jean-Michel Jarre and Aphex Twin, there's something that is universal about those, and I think it's both that they clearly, like, they just want to be themselves, and I think that kind of links back to really what, you know, that sort of question was about about the individuality and not necessarily being part of a scene, just sort of stick to your guns.
Well, before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about because we were talking about influences, you were a huge influence on me, getting up to more modern day people that influenced me as a producer. I remember when I bought the Madonna album, Confessions. Or actually, I think my wife bought it. Naomi bought it. My kids
It's okay.
bought it.
You can say you bought a Madonna record.
I'm
it's okay. They won't quote you on that.
I'm just trying to be true in telling the story. Anyway. And we're driving around in the car, and I'm like, this record is blowing my mind. What? And this is when we still bought CDs. This is 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
So I opened there, and like I was already a fan of Thin White Duke and all these things that you had launched. So, and I'm like, Stuart Price, what the? This guy made this record. And it was one of those moments where I was like, this guy just gets it. This is, because I was a Madonna fan leading up to that point in my life. I always followed her pop career. And when I heard that record, I was like, this is something special. And to this day, it's still my favorite record that she's ever done, because you put so much into it, and it's obvious when I listen to it. How did you go from, you know, you're making beats, you're DJing, you're going around here producing. Now, if you could just hit some of the highlights of how it went from cool, you're hanging out on your computer making beats in your parents' kitchen or whatever you're doing, however that story started. What are some of those like bigger moments?
I mean, it's kind of I didn't really go from one to the other. It was just like I was living this weird double life, because on the one hand, my studio was still at my parents' house, and I was just, you know, my mum was an accountant. She was sitting downstairs at the table doing her numbers, and I was upstairs making music that was too loud for her. So whilst this was going on, I was making music. I was going out, I was playing at the weekends. I'd always be looking for an idea that I could play at the weekend. So, you know, this is kind of vinyl days. It wasn't like you could really easily just go and find a fresh new track. You sort of had to either hunt things out or just hope things came to you. So a lot of the time, you just make something and say, I'll try and make something that's sort of new and exciting. And I think around then, that was, you know, always one of Madonna's amazing talents is that she just goes from her world, she just goes down and looks right into the underground and finds something kind of undiscovered. And then at that point, like when we were working on that record, we weren't going into big studios at all. I mean, we went to a couple and aborted everything that we did in it because
this is just crazy. I just can't even imagine. So she's like ringing your doorbell, coming up to your house.
Yeah.
Like, hey man, let's record.
So I should just say by this point, I've moved out of my mum and dad's house. It's not like my mum and dad.
I was a little.
Oh hi,
Madonna.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that weird. I did live in an apartment by myself, but a couple of neighbors, because it was literally, she was just showing up with her driver and getting out the car and coming into this flat in Maida Vale, and a couple of my neighbors were going, was that, I'd be like, no, it's just my friend. She's a singer. She's quite good. And, but we would, so like I say, it was this sort of dual life, because on the one hand, I was making small, you know, underground records, and at the same time, in the afternoon, she would come around at 4 o'clock, and we'd go up into the studio, and for a couple of hours, work. But the point is, we worked on music like we were working on club tracks. We didn't work on music like we were trying to build a club album. And like maybe 6 months before that, I'd worked with a singer called Juliet, a girl from Philadelphia, and we'd made a record in 3 or 4 weeks in the old Studio 54. There's a studio up in the penthouse there, and we made this record there that we both loved, that we'd both done very sort of spontaneously, like, oh, here's a track, oh, here's some lyrics, let's just put them together and see how it works. And a lot of music that came out of that time and the sort of method of making it, which was real collaboration. Oh, you're doing that, so let's do this, or let's move this track here. Nothing was set in stone. That sort of carried across into the Madonna record. So when we started working on an album, it was with that same kind of spirit of...
Yeah, it's fun. It wasn't overthought. It was like, okay, cool, let's just make this. And that comes across in the record. But Mike, how did it go from that to a similar moment happen? I'm listening to a Killers record, and I'm just like, this is amazing. Stuart! This guy is everywhere. I mean, was it intimidating going from... you know, a singer or writer that you're sitting down and collaborating with, because that's a very personal process, to recording with a band, sitting in, I mean, Brandon, you got the whole crew in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how the process works, but if somebody called me, you know, I'd be very intimidated to go from like this small process to like this, oh, okay, well, this is a much bigger deal.
Yeah, it's a weird adjustment. So you kind of go from that mode of making music where everything is on your terms and you absolutely don't compromise anything whatsoever. I don't care. This is what I'm doing. Into, what do you think? And that's a big adjustment. That's a big adjustment to make out of, you know, if you spent your whole life only making things the way you do it, into, well, the context has sort of changed here. Right. But that like, along with learning how to even play music or write music in the first place, it's like another thing that you just have to kind of learn. So intimidation, I think, comes down to how you are as a person. And I've always thought, if you want to work with big artists, if you want to make music that is going to be heard globally, you know, you're only doing yourself a disservice if you're intimidated by that process, and probably, you know, it won't work out. So you sort of have to kind of remove that fear, or that fear of failure, or whatever that is, and kind of and sort of proceed like, this is, I'm working with no one. And it is a bit weird, because that means sometimes in the studio you have to work with extremely talented people and say, yeah, you're no one. you sort of have to really reverse psych yourself out of doing it so that you can just let the music flow and you can just let it happen without it feeling, contrived or unnatural. So it's a massive adjustment. And again, that's like a lot of the time the things come back to remix culture. Because I think like remix culture is sort of one of the most important really sort of areas in the progression of music and music going forward is that what you have is a situation where you're given sort of free rein to do something. And there's not really ever going to be any fallout from it if it's an experiment that doesn't work out. And if it goes great, then it goes great, and there's an exciting track in the world. So it's so I think that in terms of record production, the importance there is that in the same way that you're just looking for something cool in your track, in your remix, you're looking for something cool to put in an original song. And I think probably I guess maybe we should sort of talk about that evolution of music, because like predicting where music is going to go is like trying to predict the stock market. Like you've got really no fucking idea, and when you gamble the wrong way, there's some pretty high risks. But
it's just next to impossible to try and predict where any of the things going to go. Not only that, I think one of the things that's so attractive about electronic music, I almost called it the underground, but I guess we're no longer calling it that. So, but what's so interesting about electronic music is it moves so fast. Like whatever's currently in vogue, whatever sound design is in fashion right now, next week it's going to be something different. I remember when Martin Garrix, I got the promo for Animals sent to me, and for, I don't know, a good 18 months, everything was just like overly melodic to the point that it was just driving me crazy. It was just like, and I was like, and I got that Martin Garrix record, and it was just, and I was like, this is brilliant. This is the best thing I've ever heard in like 2 years. This is an unbelievable record. And come to find out he's like a 17-year-old kid making a record in his parents' basement. And it was just, I loved the whole story behind it, that it took some young kid to come with a fresh approach that not really anybody was doing. What was happening at the moment, that sounded completely different. Everybody was over here doing super heavy melodic stuff and lead lines. This guy's like, cool, I'm just gonna program some really big kick drums and see what happens. And sure enough, it just, and when I met him like a month after the record had come out or after it was promoted. It was really early on. I was playing Tomorrow World, the one that's over there.
Yeah, that's Tomorrow World.
And I met him, and he was like, I just like,
what,
dude,
is that his hair?
Yeah, he had his hair. He's like doing this thing, and I was just like, that record's amazing, man. Thank you so much for doing that, because now everyone's gonna come over to this side, and it's gonna get back to rhythm again. Brilliant record, great job. It was a cool moment to meet him.
Do you think there's always an element of simplicity to any record that comes along and changes things? I mean, like Daft Punk coming along with the funk. It's so simple.
It's just inherent in electronic music, because I think part of the craft is, can I rip that sound off? You sit down at your laptop and some 20-year-old kids, they're like, can I emulate that Daft Punk compression? How are they doing that? How did they make the samples so round and juicy? I remember when I heard that record, I was like, how did they do that? Because everyone in Chicago was chopping up disco records, and they're doing that same thing, but they couldn't make it sound like those guys did. Not even close. It was like night and day. They were doing the same thing, but it's like, one was completely different, and it sounded so fresh at the time. But I guess that goes back to sticking to your guns, Yeah. I think if you're doing what you love, regardless of what the critics say or the fans say, if your intentions are true, like eventually people find that and they figure it out. It's like you don't necessarily have to follow a trend or a style. I always tell kids that sit down and like, oh man, I want to do this. I'm like, cool, discover what you're really good at and just keep going at that, just keep developing that, you know, and work with it.
Do you think there's a kind of, so like, you know, again, thinking about like the future of music, do you think there's a gradual sort of just distilling down? Because it seems like the further forward sort of dance music goes, there's a sort of, there's a simplification going on. I mean, you look at like, I mean, Animals is a very simple record. Like, you know, it's interesting what you're saying, like it's just, you know, what defines it, but like hardstyle is extremely like simple, and it's like there's only so much space for ideas. But do you see that sort of simplicity is kind of continuing to happen, where it's almost like records get less and less and less and less and less until they're just down to like a kick drum and a woodblock, and it's the biggest record of the year.
I got a kick drum and a woodblock, and I'm just going. I love that idea.
But that's kind.
I think that spirit is there right now, because I think in the beginning the technology, it was so difficult to get things to sound good and make them sound complex. That was our trouble 10 years ago.
Right.
And as that became easier and easier, like, wow, I can have 120 tracks. The computer's not even choking. So you kind of just added tracks because you could. Like, instead of one lead, I'm gonna have 7 leads making that same sound, and I'll be able to like do this crazy thing with it. And I think at one point we just realized like it doesn't necessarily have to be that. We all have the ability to have as many tracks as we want, and we can still get them to sound good. So we're kind of at an interesting moment where I think everyone's kind of realizing that we're all on the same playing field. Because before it was like the guy who had 12 seconds of sampling compared to the guy who had 2 seconds could do so much more. He could get the full loop. He didn't have to dissect and chop as much.
Yeah. I mean, to put that into perspective, like when sampling came around, part of the reason that records were, I think, underground records certainly were so creative with it, was to have a sampler that could do, you know, like more than 10 seconds of sampling would cost you about $100,000. And to have a sampler that could maybe do 1 teeny second of sampling at really shit quality was sort of just about within the reach of like producers to do. So it kind of forced a creativity, and it forced an innovation. But what you're saying now, which is, and I think it's totally true, and I think it's actually, this sometimes stands in the way of would-be writers and producers, is that like, forget like the studio computers, laptops are so insanely off the charts in terms of power that they give you this sort of infinite kind of palette, which I think a lot of people drown under. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I talk to people who are making music now, something that comes up a lot is they go, I just don't know how to bring this all under control. It's like they're drowning under this limitless possibility of computers. So really, does that come back to using this more than
I think that's why we're at an interesting time, because the technology, it's leveled the playing field. It's not $100,000 for a sampler. Kind of everyone can afford the same type of equipment, or pretty similar, you know. So it's boiling back down to the idea. Cool, we're not relying so much upon the computers or the samplers or the compressors, whatever. It's like, cool, do you have a good idea? Is it unique? Does it sound fresh? Because if it does, you can probably make it happen. You know, you can figure out a way to make it work. So I think we're at a really interesting time, and it's cool. Even like the Disclosure record, it's so beautiful, but it's really clean, and it's very straightforward, and it kind of harkens back to an older house sound. But it's like it didn't have to be overproduced, you know. Not stacks and stacks of things. So it's cool. I think the technology's led us to this point to where it's an even playing field, and we're in an exciting time where lots of different things are happening.
Yeah. You listen to Paul Kalkbrenner?
What's that?
Paul Kalkbrenner. So German record producer. He just kind of, he strikes the line really well. Like he makes this music that on the one hand is sort of deliberately, I want to say like underproduced. It's like he discards all this ability to make stuff sound big and perfect and, you know, the big sound. Like
Right.
he discards that and instead just sort of kind of underplays it all. And as a result, makes very sort of soulful, sincere sounding music that's kind of unlike anything else. You know, it's somewhat minimal, but there are songs in there. I just wonder because like I hear, you know, there's like you're writing songs. Like I don't think you're just thinking about a sick drop. You know, your music, it connects on an emotional level. I think that's why, you know, that's one of the reasons it's kind of magnified so much when you do a show is that emotional input that you've put into it can kind of come out to an audience and sort of and mean a lot. But did you ever pick up a guitar and actually sort of write songs, or did songwriting come about as a sort of byproduct of being into this music that you make?
It was a byproduct.
Right.
I started out very much so just wanting to make Chicago-sounding records, cutting up disco stuff. And in 2000, I sat in with a band, and they wanted me to remix a song.
With them there?
What's that?
They were there?
They were there. They came, said, come on over.
Oh, pressure.
Oh, it was terrible. I was sweating. You know, I was like used to my MPC. I was in a very big studio. It was lavish. You know, they had like food sandwiches and stuff. My studio was next to my washer and dryer at this point in my life. But I think they just wanted to hang out and get the vibe for what can this guy do? Because I'd messed around and done some stuff before, and I was like the nightclub guy. I was the DJ producer dude. So they wanted to say, hey, what can you do with this song? And I just got to hang out in the studio with them for a couple days and witness like the songwriting process. And it inspired me. It changed the way I was thinking about that. Right after that happened, I moved to San Francisco, and there was kind of this huge movement with Ohm Records and Naked Music, and it was more song-based. The production was nice, it was clean, it was simple, it was very warm, but more and more people were writing songs. Miguel Miggs was like skyrocketing at the time, and you know, this is the time that Sneaker Pimps were doing this cool down-tempo thing, and Portishead was having a moment, and I was like, cool, I know how to make these really fun jacking Chicago records, like, but that's just not gonna do anything for me. There's nothing special in that. I have to emulate what's happening. There has to be more of me in this record than some cut up sample. I'm gonna have to start learning how to write songs. And my grandma was a poet, and I was like, you know, I think I can do this. Like, maybe I don't overthink it. And I'd witnessed those guys sitting down and just writing ideas down and humming melodies and like working it out. And I thought, I can do this. And you know, I really relied on them for the first part of my career. Like, hey, what do you guys think of this idea? Because I was very unsure of myself. But really, I was just writing kind of simple ideas, and that worked with house music, and I just kept going from there. I mean, once It's You, It's Me came out, I realized like this idea really resonates with people. I mean, that's why I chose the name Kaskade. At the beginning, I wasn't 100% sure. I'm like, is this me? What do I want this to be? I didn't want to call it Ryan Radden because I was scared. I didn't know what the reception was going to be. It was a much more personal thing than cutting up samples. Like, oh, I'm going to write about my life. You know, it seemed like I felt much more exposed. So coming up with a moniker just seemed like an easy way to kind of like, if it sucks, like I could just, oh yeah, I did that thing 20 years ago, man. I don't know anything about that.
So does it scare you when you're on the eve of putting out something which is like new for you, you know, a new direction? Because, you know, it's like when you're putting new music out there, there's a gamble with it, especially if you're trying to, you know, evolve your music and go further. So do you get that kind of sense of fear around a new direction, or do you look at it as, you know, excitement or opportunity?
Opportunity. I mean, I don't get as nervous as I used to. Now I'm kind of like, I mean, with success comes some comfort to where I'm like,
Yeah.
cool, I really believe in this. But that's learned. I'm going to share a short story with you on the whole sticking to your guns topic.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, 7 years ago, I had an album, and I went to New York, went to the label, and I'm sitting down, and we're playing the record. You've had this moment. And, you know, for whatever reason, it's always on some really crappy sound system. You're going from
Yeah, always.
and you're like,
in mono.
damn it, you can't get some speakers in here, dude? I just worked 6 months on this record. And like, anyway, so I played them the record, and they said, hey, cool, you know, what do you think the first single should be? I kind of sat there, and I was like, I don't know. I think this song 4 a.m. is really cool. But I mean, I know you guys are dance music and you push dance music. This isn't a dance single. It's very laid back. It's loungy. The tempo's slow. But for me personally, this song resonates. There's something here. And they kind of looked at me and didn't say much, you know. And they said, cool, we'll get back to you. I don't know. It never did come out as a single on that record, you know. But people kept coming back around to it. So 4 singles came out on that record. That wasn't one of them. On the next album, they ended up including a remix version of that song and putting it back out and pushing it as a single, you know, 18, 20 months later. And I think it did better than any of the 4 previous singles off that record.
Right.
And at that time, I didn't have enough confidence to say, like, look, man, I really think this is the one. Because I'm always interested, and I do want to hear people's input. You know, you want to know what they think. I don't know. You're kind of making this thing in a vacuum, you know, playing it for your friends, loved ones, whatever. Like, what do you think? I don't know. But since that point, I've definitely had more moments like that where I'm like, nah, man, I really think this is the one. Why don't you guys take it back and think about it some more? You know, I think this is it. If you really disagree, let's have another discussion about it. But kind of just believing in yourself and having the confidence to say something.
I mean, here's a question. So are you signed, so are you still with Ultra?
I'm on Warner Brothers Records now. I just did a new deal, yeah.
So because, you know, obviously, because that process has changed now. I mean, I think when you're a new artist, or you're sort of, you know, you're doing your first music, you're getting a chance to release your first records, you're really a lot more at the mercy of what other people think within the distribution chain as to which song you should put forward. And really that can come down to you feeling one way about something, but really what's chosen is something else. And I think that's something that definitely changes with, you know, of course with success, it's more likely that people will go, Ryan wants to put out this, and it kind of carries a little more weight with it. But those, when that happens, so like Never Sleep Alone, so when that comes out, is there a sort of, because it's not really like this sort of build up to a radio date anymore. It's not really, of course that happens, but within the sort of dance music scene, it's the events that are going to go on around it. Like it just feels like at the moment, you have a massive song out, with 2 massive shows, like one weekend after the other. There's this sort of sense of momentum that comes along with doing that. I mean, is it constructed that way?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, in last week's set, I played 4 pieces of new music, and one of them only a few people have heard. I mean, literally, I was like, I'm just gonna play some stuff that nobody's heard. Like, I mean, one of the songs I hadn't even played for Naomi yet. Like, cool, you're gonna hear some brand new music on the stage. I hope you like it, you know?
Yeah.
But I think that just goes along with the confidence of where I am, and now it's kind of like, take it or leave it, love me or don't, I don't know. I'm wondering if you've ever had to go, when you're sitting and producing a record, I mean, I've done a little bit of it, but have you ever had to go like kind of toe to toe with an artist or with a label and been at that point where like, listen, man, I really like take this home, I'm gonna bounce it down, listen to it again. I really like this arrangement, or I really like this. I mean, is there ever that back and forth between you guys where you're like pushing for one thing and they're kind of like, I don't know, man, I just, or they're like, let me take this home and play it for some more people, and then they come back and they're like, you're totally right, you had it, you had that, I don't know what I was thinking, you're right.
No, so normally what happens is for every album, so with like The Killers, there was a human. With Madonna, there was a hung up. With Take That, who, you know, there was a flood. Like there's a song which it's almost like as soon as that song's happened in the studio, it's just kind of known, we've got our single. But you kind of know when a record isn't done or isn't going well because that song hasn't really presented itself. So I kind of look at it that if these conversations are coming up that people start really fighting for a song or saying, hey, I really think we should listen to this again and, you know, reconsider it. Normally what that just means is you don't have a single and you have to carry on. Now that's a really, it's like a sort of debilitating process in the studio because there may be you and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other people where you've sort of sat there and you kind of have to face the fact that you don't really just have that song yet. So sometimes in that moment, it all goes kind of wrong and you just need to take a break for a bit. Sometimes in that moment, you rise to the challenge and that's actually what you needed to kickstart you into doing that song. I think as the producer, though, what you have to represent is that stability within that whole kind of setup, and that's normally a sort of part of the role that I think I represent to whoever the artist is the kind of the rock, you know, like you can't be shaken.
Like, I'm here. We got this.
Yeah, it's that thing, and whether that means you're confidant or whether it means you're just like, you know, nerves of steel or whatever it is, that's where, as the producer, you need to be that guy. I think it's when, you know, there are so many parts in the process where the artist is taking the lead because they have that. I mean, like Brandon Flowers is a good example. Like you can't stop him writing songs. You can't stop him writing it, and you can't stop him tweaking with the songs as well and keeping going. Like he's just a song machine, and he keeps going. But he has moments of, you know, like up and down and doubt and confidence in sort of, you know, in extreme measures. So you need to be there in the middle as the guy who's consistent and who doesn't really go on them with that emotional journey. Got it. So that is, you know, and although that just sounds like you're basically a kind of shrink for the band, I think that sort of is one of the stereotypes, and it's very, very true that you end up having to take that position within there. But I guess, you know, when you're making your own music, you've sort of got yourself. I mean, but I don't know, like you say, you've said a couple of times, you show your wife stuff. You say, what do you think about this? Like that's your first, you know, one of your first ports of calls.
Yeah.
Like you're playing music at Coachella that only you and your wife have heard.
Yeah, it's like, hey, here, play this for the kids.
That's a pretty good risk.
Worked out all right.
Yeah. So that's, you know, there's, I think that's, you know, again, that comes back to the individual thing, like where so much kind of rests on you. How do you interact, or I should say, with your fans? Because we were talking upstairs about the run that you did in Miami. Like, how did that kind of splinter off? You know, you said it was because there was a lack of other, you know, we're talking about the lack of record stores.
Yeah, the run, I don't know. I'm a runner. I run on occasion. I'm not like professional or anything, but I run quite a bit because it's something easy to do while I'm on the road. You just have to pack a pair of shoes and some shorts, and you can go running wherever I am in the world. I go running. And I've started talking more about this and tweeting, and then I did some events around running for a few reasons. One, because I like running, and two, because I felt like a few years ago there was so much negative press around dance music and that it wasn't real music and these guys are hacks and they're all a bunch of drug addicts, and like there was just all this conversation around electronic music, and some of it I took very personally because I've been kind of in the trenches for so long in this country. I mean, and when the LA Times fired out at me and said, you know, not me personally, but I took it very personal, like it's just a bunch of drug-crazed kids. I'm like, man, they're discounting the work of so many people that have just put in so many hours and just struggled to make it happen. So I took it very personal. I fired back at them and wrote some Tumblr posts about that. But I thought running could be a cool way to, you know, just shine some light on something different. You know,
right?
Cool. Don't come interview with me at 3:30 in the morning when everybody's cracked out. Come to my run at 11 a.m. Let's go run around the lake over here.
It was 11 a.m. So you mean just about the time everyone was going to bed from the night before?
There was a few people that had walked out of the nightclub and went, you know, put their shoes on and ran with me. But
were they the people that were already sweating profusely before the run had even started? Or did they just go run really fast?
Yeah, it was probably, I don't know, 250 people started the run. It was more like 50 people ended the run, but that's all right. It's, you know, they were there in spirit. But it was a lot of fun, and I plan to do more of them, and I think it's just kind of, you know, changing the subject a little bit that, you know, I always want to point out to people like, oh, yeah, sure, drugs are being used at a lot of these events, but there's a lot of people that are sober too, and they enjoy the music. I think club culture and the music and electronic music, house music was there for me when I was a kid, and it was a place where I could go and escape to, and it was more of a safe haven and a place that I went to escape that. You know, everybody in my high school was like cracking open the keg and stealing their parents' drugs and doing those, and we were taking the train into the city and going out all night. So it was like, am I gonna hang out with these football players that are gonna beat each other up and get drunk, or am I gonna go into the city and like put on eyeliner and dance around to some house music, you know? So it was, for me, no one was more evil than the other, you know? So I just didn't like the fact that the scene was being put on so much by the actions of just a few.
So, see, I think that's really cool, that this whole idea of change the subject, of not just letting associations of, like, you know, things that, you know, not letting the bad stories kind of lead the way. Because I think that's the thing is like, you know, the reason dance music exists is because I think ultimately it's because of its positivity and because of its...
Amen to that, man. That's what I'm talking about. It's, I think there's a draw on people like Coachella or Electric Daisy, Carnival, Tomorrow World, Tomorrowland, all these places people like to get together and have a celebration. And I think there's a lot of positivity in that, and it gets overlooked and overshadowed by, you know, one unfortunate event or something that happens. A lot of these things go off without a hitch. And I just started speaking up and speaking out about, oh, wow, you know, there was some really unfortunate stuff that happened at a Keith Urban concert recently, and they didn't, you know, they didn't come down on country music. And I said, there's a discrepancy here. If that would have happened at at one of our events, the thing would be shut down for good. That would have been it. That's it. No more.
Yeah.
You know, Keith Urban goes on and plays plenty of concerts, and nobody's like, oh, country music, they're drug-crazed fools. I can't stand them. You know?
Those country music guys, they don't go on a run at 11 a.m. after they've left a nightclub.
Not at all.
Thanks, guys. Listen, we're running out of time, so maybe if you want to put some questions out. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, over here. You have a mic?
Hi.
How's it going, guys? My name's Anthony. I work with DJCity.com.
Hi, Anthony.
How you doing?
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Kaskade, I have a question for you. I've been following your career for a while. I used to actually sell your own records releases at a independent hip-hop store, interestingly enough. And I've watched you progress through the years. You've obviously done some different styles. You haven't stuck with one thing, which is great. But when we were promoting your latest single, you know, of course, the trolls came out of the woodwork like they always do. And I saw some comments about people saying like you're hopping on the future house train and all that kind of crap.
I love this question. Bring it.
So I want to hear your response, because I don't think you're hopping on a train. I think you've evolved throughout your career. And,
what if you're the guy who laid the tracks? Like, or jumping on what train? I think it's funny. I buy a new keyboard and everybody's like, you're making a different genre of music. You buy a new plug-in, the compression sounds different. It's a new genre of music. I just don't like the word future house, because house is the future. There's no such thing as future house. We've been living in the future since freaking 1982. Like, I don't like that term, future house. Anyway, I think what's remained consistent in my music is the fact that I'm so closely tied to the lyrics and the melody. I've either co-written or written those songs. However I choose to produce them, or when I sit down at that moment, it's what's going to connect and make the song work as well as possible and get out there as much as possible. I think finding a style, a production style that works with a song is it's an art form. It's a part of what happens, the magic in the studio when those two things combine. And for me, I've had a hand in writing so much of my music. I mean, dance music nowadays, everybody just makes an instrumental track and sends it out. And then somebody writes a top line onto them, and it's sent back to the producer. They've never even met this vocalist. I mean, this process is quite new to me. And I didn't understand how, when I first got introduced to that process, I'm like, I don't understand that. I've always sat in the room and written with people or written the song myself. How it comes out in production to me is here nor there, because like I said, today this style's in, tomorrow that style is not. I think this new Never Sleep Alone, the single, yes, it sounds like future house, whatever you want to call it. The lead synthesizer is in that realm, but I've always concentrated on what's happening in the nightclubs, and that's what I'm hearing. I mean, I spend much of my life in a nightclub. Of course, these things are impressed upon me, so it's impossible to escape that. But
one follow-up question. So I think it was Skrillex that really brought a lot of attention. Like, he dropped that track at some festival or something. I saw a lot of headlines for that. Do you have any plans on collaborating with him, or?
Yeah,
He does future house, right? Skrillex future house.
I'm sure he's all about it. He's very future. Skrillex, he's living in the future. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure Skrillex and I will make some more music together. We've collaborated in the past. I have an immense amount of respect for him and what he's been able to achieve and do, and he's an incredible musician and a great producer. So, yeah, I look forward to working with him again.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I have a question for Stuart. I'm a professional songwriter. I'm a professional songwriter for TV, film, but I write for a lot of artists, dance, pop, all kinds of artists. I want to ask you a question. If you had an artist, and you guys have a song, and the vocal on the demo is way better than the vocal when they finish the track, would you say something?
Oh yeah, keep it. The thing is, there's no such thing as a demo vocal. There's only such thing as a demo vocal and a finished vocal in literature.
I mean the scratch vocal first, and then by the time the song is done, it is not nearly as good as the scratch. Would you say something?
Yeah, so I mean, do I personally do it? Yes. The approach I take with artists is that every single moment the microphone's on and we're recording, that could be it. That could be the final vocal. It has to be that way, because really, whether you've recorded it on an amazing microphone with amazing settings and things like that, or whether you've recorded it on this guy here, it doesn't matter, because it's the performance that comes across. So there's an album I made with Kylie Minogue. We used, in fact, this exact microphone we used for the whole thing. SM58, yeah, go sure. And and that's because the way we wrote the album was we were sitting around and we would have a song on and she would pick up the mic and say, oh, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? Typically, I think with a singer like that, you sort of think, okay, we're going to use this set, we're going to use a large diaphragm condenser, and we're going to put it through this preamp because that's the golden sound.
Right.
The problem is you can get the golden sound and you've still got a shit vocal because the vibe just wasn't there on that day. So you know, yes, if you've got a scratch vocal and it's better than the final vocal, you with 100% confidence say, we're going with that. Why? Because it's better.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Here we go.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Hello.
I have a question for both you guys. Earlier you touched on it too. I feel like your guys' music has much more melody and songwriting than a lot of other...
Has much more what, sorry?
Melody and songwriting than a lot of other club tracks. So does Kalkbrenner's. So do you find it's more challenging to write music that is embedded with more traditional songwriting or melody versus just like a simple beats and bass track?
Yeah. That is absolutely not condescending to the other, because they're both equally important, and you don't know which is going to set off the other one as well. A lot of the time, the beats tracks are what lay the foundation for a whole sort of movement of something which ends up in songs. And sometimes by the time it gets to the point where there are songs in that style, it's sort of that style's actually become saturated, and maybe now it's just on commercial radio, and so it's sort of been and gone. So I think the hard thing is that, you know, it's actually a really tricky question to answer, because I think beats normally come out of a moment. Something happens, quite often an accident. Oh, I was trying to do this, but I fucked up and I did this, and shit, it's loads cooler. Songwriting tends to be a little bit more deliberate. Like I'm going to come up with a vocal line from here. I mean, I know that's not strictly true, because sometimes you just take a toilet break and you come up with the best top line that you ever come up with, and you don't really want anyone to know how you came up with it. But it's sort of, it's something that I think you do take seriously, and you can find it quite tough. Whereas beat making for me always has an air of sort of, you know, joy about it and carefreeness, even if it's ultimately something that ends up being a pretty dark, intense track.
Yeah, I think it's almost like two different parts of the brain. I think
Yeah.
it's cool to write to something that sounds fresh. When somebody sends me something and say, hey, can you write a song over this? A lot of times I just listen to the song and I'm like, no, I can't. There's nothing in here for me. I don't hear anything. Or they send it to me and immediately I'm like, I hear a melody, dude. Just let me sit here and think of lyrics. And this is how the collaborations with deadmau5 happened. He sent me an instrumental track and I was like, oh my gosh. Immediately on Instant Messenger, I'm like, dude, I have something. I have a melody already. I've listened to it one time and I have a melody and it's really strong. I'm going to sit here and hum it into the microphone. I'll have some lyrics for you shortly. And that's how that song came to be. But it was very quick. It came quickly because the music bed was so inspiring. The chords that he played, the warmth from the song, I was like, man, I hear something immediately. It just evoked an emotion to me, and it was very easy to write to. So I think but then making beats, yeah, some kind of weird mistake happens. You're like, wow, this is cool. And it just continues to, you know, escalate from that point.
Anyone else?
I think we're done.
Pete Tong's got a question.
It's a shepherd's hook. No,
Really?
thank you very much. Please, Stuart Price and Kaskade.